Hello everybody, welcome back to First Friday Fives here on Go Big Bore or Go Home, where recoil is required. Why? Because we're the house of the rising gun. This month marks our 7-year anniversary on YouTube, specifically on the 17th, and I wanted to celebrate by revisiting a few videos from the past, starting with one of our most understandably controversial videos and seeing if my thoughts on the subject have changed. And that video was the top 5 most overrated big bore handgun cartridges. Last time I kinda winged it on explaining my point of view, and I think I did a poor job. So this time I decided I wanted to give a more thoughtful presentation. Let me begin by setting out my parameters and judging what makes a cartridge overrated. First, overrated, according to Merriam-Webster.com, means rated or valued too highly. Side note, it does not mean something is bad or of poor quality. A lot of folks misunderstood that the last go-round. Given the definition, that naturally means we need to ask, rated or valued too highly compared to what? This was something I failed to establish last time. In this case, I am saying the following list of cartridges are rated too highly among the general shooting public. Big bore enthusiasts, hunters, and silhouette shooters may disagree, and for very good reason. Some cartridges are rated accurately by the folks who know them best, while at the same time are over or underrated by the general shooting public. And that's what we're looking at here. And before we discuss the list today, let's give a brief rundown of the original list. Number 5, the 40 Smith & Wesson. Number 4, the 44 Magnum. Number 3, the 500 Smith & Wesson Magnum. Number 2, the 45 Auto. And number 1, the 50 Action Express. Now, while some cartridges remained on the list, some moved places, and some have been even removed entirely. I will explain why this occurred as it comes up, but I do recommend watching my original video on the topic before continuing, poorly scripted though it was. Please remember that I'm not asserting this list is anything more than opinion. If you disagree, that's perfectly fine, as I don't see this as a right or wrong type of list. Now let's look at the updated list and see what, if anything, has changed. Number 5. Previously the 40 Smith & Wesson, now the 44 Magnum. I don't think I have ever pissed off more people in my life than when I originally called the 44 Magnum overrated, but before we go on to why it's still on the list, I want to briefly address why the 40 Smith & Wesson was removed from the list entirely. Originally, I had the 40 Smith & Wesson at number 5, as I felt it was a bit overrated, but not dramatically. When the 40 Smith & Wesson was introduced in 1990, expanding projectiles did not expand reliably. And the 40 Smith & Wesson was definitely something that seemed to really give a pistol a better chance at successfully defending the shooter. But these days, expanding ammunition has come a long way in reliably expanding, and a 9mm with good ammunition is a much more feasible option than it was in 1990. I mean, according to our current Commander-in-Chief, a 9mm can blow a lung out of the body. Bullshit! In all seriousness, the 40 Smith & Wesson has more recoil, less capacity, and creates more wear and tear on firearms than a 9mm. And from my experience, it doesn't offer less recoil than a 45 ACP, which I would actually prefer. I incorrectly stated it was designed as a happy medium between the 9mm and the 45 ACP, but it was marketed that way at pretty much every gun store I've ever been to. It was, in fact, a happy medium between the 9mm and the 10mm, which someone pointed out correctly in the comments. So why isn't it on the list anymore? Well, the campaign to make it disappear from the market in the last 5 years since I made the original video has made my jaw drop. Once law enforcement dropped the 40 Smith & Wesson, everyone seemed to lose interest in it. I was honestly surprised. To the 40 Smith & Wesson's credit, it is a solid performing round that does exactly what it was designed to do. I even found a 6R P320F in 40 Smith & Wesson that I really like. But SIG no longer makes anything in that caliber, the rotten bastards. Many other companies have abandoned it entirely, and almost everyone seems to want nothing to do with it. Definitely not overrated anymore. So back to the 44 Magnum, why is it still here on this list? Well, first I'd like to thank the folks that took the time to share thoughtful responses to this entry on the last video. Very insightful, and it did sway my opinion. This was in contrast to the many who acted like calling the 44 Magnum overrated was like calling their mother a lady of the evening, if you get me. Calm down, fellas, it's not personal. Anyway, the 44 Magnum needs to be acknowledged as the great round it is, one of the best. Great for hunting and competition, and powerful for trail defense against large, dangerous game. Seriously, to the big bore crowd and the handgun hunting crowd, it's known for its legendary performance, but to the general shooting public, they still seem to hold this cartridge in higher regard than it should be held in. I explained in the original video that every time I'm at the range shooting a big bore revolver, someone wanders over with a grin and asks, "Is that a 44? There's still this consensus that the only powerful revolver out there is the 44 Magnum. I understand that some folks out there haven't heard of more esoteric cartridges like the 480 Ruger, the 500 JRH, or the 475 Linebaugh, but they do know about the big Smith & Wesson cartridges, don't they? Also, there is still this idea that the 44 Magnum can shoot through a pickup truck, 2 Abrams tanks, Fort Knox, and kill the T-Rex hiding behind your refrigerator. The Lottie 20mm anti-tank rifle can't do that. It's a great round, but it has its limits. When going after really large game like moose, Kodiak, grizzly, Cape buffalo, etc., every hunter I know recommends going with a bigger caliber, and for good reason. The .44 Magnum can take that game, but you have to push it very hard and beyond Sammy's specs. So because it's treated like the equivalent of a howitzer and like it's still the only powerful hand cannon out there, it makes the list. But I moved it back to number 5 because it can live up to most of the hype and just barely deserves to be here. Number 4. Previously the .44 Magnum, now the .500 Smith & Wesson Magnum. Like the .44 Magnum falling one spot to number 5, this fell from number 3 to number 4. Again, the folks that took the time to lay out a convincing argument in the comments of the last video made me think about the caliber more. I still think it's overrated, and some of my experiences with it in the last 5 years have confirmed that. But I don't think it's as overrated as I previously did. The .500 Smith & Wesson Magnum is the reigning most powerful handgun in the world, and to its credit, only the .460 Smith & Wesson Magnum can give it a run for its money, often trading places depending on the load data. I will say that my experience has been that when you push both rounds to their limits, the .500 will outdo the .460 by a narrow margin. Anyways, overrated. Why is it here? The .500 Smith & Wesson Magnum was, in all honesty, designed to be a cartridge that would be untouchably the most powerful handgun cartridge in the world so Smith & Wesson could make money. That's not a criticism, it was great marketing and it worked beautifully. And it's a really freaking cool cartridge. It's fun to shoot in small doses and powerful enough to take anything on this earth, including most dinosaur species. But it comes at a cost. Everyone thinks this is the 50 to have, but the gun is heavy and massive. It's difficult to carry when hunting and fatiguing to hold for a 5-shot group. Seriously, it's so much mass that it doesn't really strike me as any less trouble than carrying a rifle. And the recoil is still abusive despite the weight and muzzle brake. And when it comes to loading for hunting, I explained in a previous video that the only advantage it has over the other 50 calibers is velocity. You can shoot heavier bullets, but for the most part the other 50s will be comparable in bullet weight. And more velocity can have a negative impact on the integrity of the projectile, veering it off in an inopportune direction away from vital organs, or damaging bones and wounding but not killing the game. So pushing it to its supersized limits isn't always an advantage. When it comes down to it, there are other 50 caliber hunting handguns that are lighter to carry, smaller in overall size, lower in recoil, and just as effective on game that would be better choices. So while it deserves the reputation it has for power and it's a solid hunting performer, it's still overrated. Number 3, previously the .500 Smith & Wesson Magnum, now the .45 Auto. Like the 2 entries prior, the .45 Auto slides back one spot. But I almost moved this cartridge back to number 4 as I don't think it gets hyped as much as the .500 Smith & Wesson Magnum. But what made up my mind to leave it here is that the claims about the .45 Auto are further from the truth than the claims about the .500 Smith & Wesson Magnum. For all intents and purposes, the .500 will do what most claim it will, but its negatives are overlooked or entirely ignored. In terms of the .45 Auto being overrated, it comes down to a demonstrably false claim that, quote, only a .45 will do, unquote. That's just not true these days. If we go back to before we had reliably expanding ammo, or if you're stuck with full metal jacket ammo, I would absolutely take a .45 over its competition every single time. Let's face it, while a 9mm gains a lot of efficacy with expanding bullets, the .45 Auto could get the job done with old-fashioned ball ammo. But now with consistent expanding ammunition, the 9mm is quite viable. So this idea that you need a .45 is just not true. That said, yes, it's still my favorite and preferred handgun round. And I would never criticize someone for choosing it. Like the venerable .357 Magnum, the .45 Auto will never die because it's got a great reputation for success. There are a few other reasons I find it to be overrated as well. It requires a larger pistol to accommodate the size of the round, and with heavier bullets, it can be a bit of a chore to carry when compared to something like a 9mm or even a .40 Smith & Wesson. It's also very dirty due to its lower pressures, making cleaning a pain in the butt. Recoil is more pronounced than a 9mm too. There's no point in having bigger bullets if you can't hit anything with them. And ammo is pricier than both 9mm and .40 Smith & Wesson as well. At the end of the day, the .45 Auto is a fantastic cartridge, but its drawbacks are real and often overlooked when they shouldn't be for some shooters. And the claim that it's the only solid choice for self-defense just screams overrated. Number 2. Previously the .45 Auto, now the .400 Cor-bon. A new entrant to the list, this is a cartridge that I didn't know much about at the time I made the previous video, but have become fully acquainted with since. And it absolutely should be on this list. If you're not familiar with this round, it was designed in 1997 and is a .45 Auto casing necked down to a .40 caliber. The idea was to produce 10mm power out of a standard .45 Auto platform with little modification by using a bottlenecked case version of the .45 Auto. The problem is that it didn't exactly succeed. The .400 Cor-bon would keep very close pace with the 10mm up until 165 grain bullets were used. After that, it fell behind. And since most 10mm enthusiasts like myself prefer 180 or 200 grain bullets, this was a disappointment. And it really became an in-between cartridge that was more than a 40 Smith & Wesson and less than a 10mm. That's not all that useful, nor does it make sense to not just buy a 10mm and load it down a little bit. You might think that hot loading the round to keep pace with or exceed the 10mm would give it some life. And you'd be wrong. Attempts to do so have resulted in catastrophic failures, aka blowing up your gun. Part of the problem is the brass, which was derived off of 45 Auto plus P brass, was not intended to exceed the SAMI rated 35,000 psi chamber pressure of the 400 cor-bon. And when you consider that the 40 Super was designed in 1 year prior in 1996 with a longer case length and stronger brass with the intention to exceed the velocities of the 10mm, then the 400 cor-bon becomes little more than an also-ran. That said, I hear about this cartridge from people non-stop and even started playing with it myself. But I don't get the hype. You're better off just buying a 40 Smith & Wesson or a 10mm for most purposes, and if you have the need for speed, then convert a 45 Auto to a 40 Super, because when it comes to what it's supposed to be, the only description for the 400 cor-bon is overrated. Number 1. Drumroll please. Previously, and still, the 50 Action Express. I really cannot think of a single other cartridge that gets so much hype, praise, excitement, and more without really having a reason for it than the 50 Action Express. The cartridge was designed in 1988 specifically for use in the Desert Eagle. To prevent a need to change the bolt in the gun, the rim is rebaited to the size of a .44 Magnum. And to prevent the gun's functioning from needing a longer slide stroke, the overall cartridge length is once again restricted to the specifications of the .44 Magnum. Now, for the purpose of creating the most badass, Magnum-powered semi-auto pistol, the half-inch bore and power of the 50 Action Express is an undeniable win. And that's all the credit it really deserves. This round has a lot of power, muzzle blast, and recoil that make it quite a monster to contend with. But it doesn't really have any useful purpose whatsoever. It's not good for competition purposes, its limited overall cartridge length limits bullet weight, which hinders cross-sectional density that would hinder its hunting performance, it's way too powerful to be used for self-defense in any capacity, its taper crimp makes the bullets scoot out of the casing, making chambering it in a revolver less than an optimal idea, and given the cost of ammunition and abuse it puts the shooter through, it's not exactly what I would call a plinker. One comment on my original video said, quote, "The 50AE isn't overrated, it's useless," unquote. It's really kind of hard to argue with that. It's a cool round and I genuinely love shooting it. I even shot the most accurate group of my life with this round. But for all the love and attention it gets, it doesn't deliver much. And for that reason, it was in the beginning, is now, and forever shall be the most overrated big bore handgun cartridge, world without end. Amen. So let's recap that list before we go. Number 5, the .44 Magnum. Legitimately amazing to those who know, but not the monster the masses seem to think it is. Number 4, the 500 Smith & Wesson Magnum. So much power and steel, a smaller 50 might be a better choice. Number 3, the 45 Auto. It's great, but not the only good option despite the claims of some. Number 2, the 400 cor-bon. It can't reach its intended performance and it's dangerous when exceeded. And number 1, the 50 Action Express. Still no reason to shoot it other than, cool story, bro. Thanks for watching and I hope you enjoyed the reevaluation of this list. Do you agree, or do you think the cartridges here get the credit they deserve from the general shooting public? Let us know in the comments section below, and please share with us what cartridges you think are overrated. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and if you didn't enjoy it, thanks for making it this far and giving us a chance. And remember, go big bore, or go home. I was honestly surprised. To the Smith &